We've got Congressman Khanna joining us. He's a Democratic congressman from California's 17th District. Welcome, Congressman Khanna. Are you there?
I am. Thanks for having me.
Hi, Congressman. Nice to see you again.
Great to see you.
Yeah. So, what's your take on Barr? Do you think he'll recuse himself? Do you have qualms with that?
Well, I agree with you. I think the key is that the Mueller investigation be allowed to continue without interference, and I don't want Barr to interfere with that. I do think this is an insight into the Republican Party. You know, there was a lot of nostalgia for George Herbert Walker Bush, some of it justified. He was a World War II hero. But when you look at the Bushes and the Republican Party, I mean, George W. Bush was behind Kavanaugh and pushing for Kavanaugh. And now you have someone like Barr who has been brought in with concerns about whether he's going to recuse himself from the Russia investigation. So we really need to understand that the Republican Party at large has not been holding President Trump responsible and accountable, and that's of concern.
Yeah. So moving on, let's talk about Yemen, which is something that you are greatly concerned with and speak about a lot. You recently wrote an op-ed with Senator Elizabeth Warren calling for an end to U.S. military aid for the Saudi war there. I know that you wanted to pass some sort of legislation invoking the 1973 War Powers Act, but you were thwarted by a bill called the Manage Our Wolves Act, which is kind of bizarre. So can you tell me a little bit about that?
Now, first, just to put it in perspective, people who have seen the pictures of the young girl dying of starvation, there are hundreds of thousands of children in Yemen who will die in the next couple months if we don't do anything. There is a famine that could threaten 14 million people. Some things are about politics. This really is not. This is about basic humanity. We need to stop the bombing and get food and medicine into young kids so that we can save their lives. I introduced a resolution in the House along with Mark Pocan and Walter Jones and colleagues of mine. We had 15 Republicans actually support it, and it just called for a debate on the House so that we could stop our aid to the Saudis, which are bombing Yemeni civilians. The Republicans didn't allow a clean vote on the bill. They did something that is illegal. They put that bill in a bill regarding endangered wolves and weren't even allowed to have a clean vote on Yemen in the House. It was one of the most outrageous things I've seen in my time in Congress. Fortunately, Bernie Sanders and Mike Lee are taking it up in the Senate. They will have a vote next week. But again, the Saudi lobby is out in full force and trying to defeat that vote.
So, Congressman, aren't you worried about a potential vacuum basically, we know this is more of a proxy war between what's happening with Iran backing the Houthis and Saudi Arabia trying to back the opposition. So aren't you concerned about a leadership void? And would that allow the Iranians, as we know, they have an incredible ambition to be a regional hegemon? Aren't you concerned about that?
Well, it's a fair point, and I don't think we ought to be engaged in proxy wars, which is what it has become with the Saudis and Iran. But regardless of how you believe the new government should be constituted, whether it should have the old regime from Yemen, which the Saudis support, whether it should have the Houthis, whether there should be any influence from Iran, that's a diplomatic question that Special Envoy Griffith at the UN should negotiate. What I hope we can all agree on is that we should have an immediate ceasefire of violence, allow food and medicine in there to prevent the famine, and then we can look at what the new government should be. And, you know, people can disagree with that, and that should be a debate through the UN. But no one should be for the continuation of violence, and everyone should be for a ceasefire.
Well, sure. Everyone, we support ceasefire, but you can't say the same for the Iranians, right? Isn't that just wishful thinking?
No, because right now the people who are bombing the port of Hodeidah, which is the key place where we need the ceasefire, are the Saudi coalition. They're the ones bombing it. I'm not saying that Iran isn't involved in parts of the civil war. The influence, I think, has been slightly exaggerated, but there is an Iranian involvement. The problem, though, is that the port of Hodeidah is what's being bombed, and according to the UN, that's why we're not allowing food and medicine. So what I've said is stop the bombing of the Port of Hodeidah. At the very least, the United States shouldn't be supporting that bombing. We're not supporting Iran. We should have no reason to be supporting the Saudis. And once the port is open, food and medicine will be able to get in.
Representative, there are reports that Saudis are bombing, school buses full of children. They're blocking water supply, which is leading to a huge, unprecedented cholera outbreak. If the U.S. continues to support Saudi Arabia's efforts, is there any way we could be faulted for these humanitarian crimes?
Well, we are. There are Yemenis kids who think that it's American bombs that are killing them, and many of the Yemeni civilians blame the United States. I think unfairly, because I do think that the atrocities have been more the Saudis, and our military would never act in the barbaric way that the Saudis have acted. We have a much more regard for human life, but it is backfiring on us because we're being blamed for the Saudi action. And that's why it's in the U.S. strategic interest to say we have nothing to do with the coalition's bombings. We don't support that bombing. We're not going to aid that bombing. And this is Saudi Arabia that's doing it, not the United States.
Right. And that could lead to, ISIS coming in, and it could end up hurting the U.S. down the line. But it seems like there's a peace process beginning in Sweden. Are you hopeful?
I am. I actually thought that was a very encouraging sign in Sweden. It's one of the most encouraging signs I've seen in the last year since we've been trying to get this conflict to end. But I think the more the United States does, the more pressure there's going to be on the Saudis to negotiate. And the biggest thing we can do is send a message from Congress that the United States isn't going to support this war.
So, Congressman, we want to turn real quick while we still have you to the topic of the environment. And I know you tweeted out, I think we got your tweet that you tweeted out in support of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to chair some type of climate change committee or lead up the initiative for Democrats. My question is, isn't that just a little bit reckless to put it in the hands of someone who has so little experience as it relates to science and climate change, that if you want to be taken seriously, and look, I'm all for women running for office. I think it's laudable what she did in terms of defeating the incumbent. That was a pure miracle. But in terms of being taken seriously on a policy level, does she have the depth for that?
Well, I think she has the vision and the boldness. She has gotten the entire Congress's attention on the Green New Deal. And that is this proposal that could create millions of jobs in helping create the new smart grid, helping create electric vehicles, bringing advanced manufacturing for clean technology, also allowing for retrofitting of buildings. So she has been bold in ways that others haven't. She doesn't take a dime from fossil fuel money. Look, I value experience. We've got a lot of committees like the Energy and Commerce Committee that we have veterans for 20 years, and the Natural Resources Committee. Any legislation would have to go through multiple committees. But I don't think it's a bad thing in a Congress to also have some of the freshmen have a leadership role. I'm not saying all freshmen should be in leadership, and I support people of experience for speaker and majority leader. But the Congress is supposed to consider all perspectives, and I think this new freshman class deserves some leadership role.
Sure, but look, green jobs sound wonderful, but we see in practice Solyndra, the collapse of Solyndra. You see the experiment by Germany, $2 trillion of green initiatives. And what ends up happening is it hurts the middle class because they end up paying more for their energy. And it's the green economy has collapsed around the world. So why would we continue to do what we know is not working?
Well, that hasn't been my experience in California. In California, we've achieved 33% renewable energy. We're creating a lot of jobs. We're responsible for the president's stock market. Companies like Apple and Google have driven most of the economic growth in this country. It's also in the Midwest. States like Iowa have 40% clean energy. You look at the success with electric vehicles in this country. The GM and Tesla have done really well, and we ought to be expanding that. I agree with you that there have been failures. Solyndra was a failure. I don't think we ought to be just picking winners and losers. But we can be making investments that are smart in ARPA-E, in electric vehicles, in the smart grid, and also being consistent with job creation.
Representative, I think we all realize that something needs to be done and soon, but there are still a lot of Republican representatives who don't believe in climate change. We have a president who denies or questions climate change pretty actively. How are you going to get this Green New Deal passed? What are you going to do to get some of those Republicans on board?
Well, fortunately, there are some Republicans who are at least acknowledging that climate change exists. I'm on a bipartisan caucus, the Climate Change Solution. I joined that with Francis Rooney. It's no coincidence that he's from Florida. I think states which have been impacted by hurricanes that have had greater force because of the warming of the water, states that have seen firsthand the impact of tornadoes and more severe tornadoes, that have seen fires. Fires and hurricanes don't distinguish between whether a community has more Republicans or Democrats. And so I think you're seeing more and more members of Congress willing to do something. Now, we have different ideas about how we get there, but I'm heartened that there's at least some members who are on the Republican side acknowledging that something needs to be done.
So, Congressman, can you tell us first exactly what is the Green New Deal, or the New Green Deal, I should say? No, the Green New Deal.
It's the Green New Deal.
What is the Green New Deal? And as a Republican myself, when I hear that, I think of, wow, this is going to be more debt. This is going to be more spending. We have a big deficit problem. I'm mad at the Republicans for what they did with the deficit. I think they were fiscally irresponsible. But my question is, why would Democrats to continue that path if, when I hear Green New Deal, we know the New Deal, the original New Deal was a lot of more government spending.
But it bolstered the economy.
Well, the New Deal, I think even Reagan, I think, agreed that the New Deal was necessary after the Depression. But look, let me give you some specifics on what the Green New Deal would be. The Green New Deal is just this idea that America should lead in job creation when it comes to renewable energy and clean technology. Electric vehicles are a great example, and this is a place we may disagree. But the president wants to end the tax credits for electric vehicles. And GM and Tesla and Ford and Toyota are calling for an expansion of the electric vehicle tax credit. One of the reasons GM has closed down its plants is because they aren't being able to make things like electric cars. So my view is, why don't we expand the electric vehicle tax credit, put people at GM back to work in these factories, and have them make more electric cars, especially with lithium-ion battery prices coming down. Another place we could put people to work is in retrofitting of buildings, and in other places in the investment of the smart grid or ARPA-E. So I think that these investments and tax credits have to be smart. I would welcome my Republican colleagues to the debate to see what are the best policies. And then we ought to implement this to be the leader in the nation on creating, leader in the world in creating these kind of jobs.
Great. One last question, Congressman. I know that Dan Lipinski, your Democratic colleague, you endorsed his primary opponent because she was pro-abortion. I'm someone who's pro-life. And you had said that the right to an abortion is a civil right. And for me, I find that to be just completely different in terms of the right to protect an innocent child is so different. So, but when you said those comments, there were only 2 pro-life House Democrats. It's clear that to be pro-life in the Democratic Party, it's an endangered species. Is there room in the Democratic Party for people to have an actual ideological diversity?
It's a fair question, and I certainly respect your personal opinion and believe that we need to respect political difference. I am strongly pro-choice. I was on the board of Planned Parenthood for 5 years in my district. What I have said is that Roe versus Wade and a woman's right to choose is a constitutional right in our country, and that people can have a personal view on whether or not they support abortion, but from a legal matter and a constitutional matter, they should support a woman's right to choose. And I believe that should be the platform of the Democratic Party.
Well, it certainly is, but the debate about the Constitution, I think, is still very divided in the country. So, but we appreciate you coming on, Congressman.
I appreciate the fair questions. I enjoyed the show.
Congressman,
Thanks.
good luck, and we look forward to seeing what you do starting January 3rd.
Sounds great.
Yep.
Look forward to being back on sometime.